welcome back to another episode of the DailyFlip podcast. I'm your host, Alex, and today we're going to be going through the headlines regarding SNAP. Yep, SNAP is on the chopping block. The Republicans are using it as leverage. The Democrats don't want to see it go away. We're going to see how this one actually plays out, but we're going to do it from a perspective that is obviously biased, and I don't mean my own. I mean the article today is from Daily Wire. They lean right, so keep that in mind as we go through. So with that, let's jump into the daily debate. Is it the responsibility of the federal government to ensure that SNAP stays in place, even when debating larger budget issues? I want to know your opinion. Is it the duty of the federal government to make sure that this program stays in place? I think you can make lots of good arguments on either side, and we'll get into my opinions on it, but we want to give you the room. So throw it down in the comment section. With that, let's get to the article from Daily Wire. Like I said, headline reads, quote, "It's a bad day for Chuck Schumer. Dems waver as Fed union calls for an end to the shutdown." And that number, that idea, is a little bit deceiving because the actual disparity, when I checked earlier, between where people put the blame, is about 39% on Democrats and 45 to 46% on Republicans. Those numbers split pretty evenly between Republicans and Democrats. The split down is interesting when it comes to gender divide. It's about 50% of women overall, and I believe the number was 39% of men. It could be lower than that. It may have been 29. But point overall, that Daily Wire's framing here is interesting. They think that the online battles are representative of the people, and that's putting a lot of weight on the polls when I'm giving my opinion, saying that actually there's a difference there. But polling doesn't seem to actually show that there's a drastic shift in who they're blaming after the SNAP deadline was really brought to the fore. Now, new polling could obviously change that, especially as we go into a time when there is no longer SNAP. But that doesn't mean that their point here, just because their data analysis seems to be a little bit off, that doesn't mean that their point should be lost on us. Quote, "The American Federation of Government Employees, which represents 800,000 federal workers, on Wednesday urged the Senate to approve a clean, continuing resolution to end the stalemate. The union, usually a dependable Democratic stalwart, all but endorsed Republicans' plan to end the shutdown in a statement," end quote. Don't think it's that quite straightforward, but the union and their leaders did actually straight up say, hey, the way forward right now to get our people back to work, to make sure that they are not living off of SNAP program benefits that will go away, that they're not going to these local food banks, which you saw a lot of people lined up outside of food banks recently. Their argument is just get over yourself and pass a clean CR, and then we'll be able to support you as you get back into the battle. And that is an argument that is not lost on the Democrats, but they are beholden to a place that is outside D.C., and that place is their base. Their base, the really progressives, obviously, are in D.C., too, but a majority of them are decentralized and across the nation, and just like Daily Wire falls for the online chatter leaning one way or another, so too do the Democrats who are currently in power. They hear the outrage and they see the tweets, the mentions, the reply guys coming back and saying, why aren't you doing more? Why aren't you protecting these programs? Why are you allowing the Republicans to sunset these? And they're asking for action. They want their party to do something, especially coming out of the first 6 months of the Trump administration, where they seem to be wrong-footed a majority of the time. Does that mean that they should give in to the base? Does that mean that they should, on principle, stand in a place where it's untenable? There will never be a Republican switch within the Senate to get enough votes to actually pass the healthcare provisions or re-subsidize the ACA and make sure that the subsidies that were brought along during the Biden era are going to continue into the future. I don't think that will ever happen. I think it's actually much more practical to have Democrats who have previously argued for continuing the budget and for continuing resolutions, for continuing the current levels of spending previously, making sure that the federal government does not continue to be closed, to have supporters in this union, the AFGE, that we just mentioned earlier. I think that is much more likely. But we move into a time where the pressure becomes even larger for the Democrats, and that is where I really believe they'll buckle, not only because of the principles that we mentioned, but because so many people will be affected by SNAP. Now, if SNAP causes the Republicans to go down in the polling, and now they're at 60% blame Republicans and 40% blame Democrats, or maybe the statistics leave a little bit of room for independent reasons that are neither or both. So maybe that statistic is a little bit different. Maybe it's at a place where it's actually 60-30. I don't know then if the Republicans will buckle. I do believe that they believe this is a principled stand, that they believe this is a place they can win on. They believe it hits home to their base. They are already in alignment with their base rather than the Democrats having to plead the case to their base to switch it up. And that is what is really going to be the hamstrings on the Democrats getting what they want here. I feel like it's a futile battle. And that's not to say that the Republicans are perfect. It's not to say that their policy is right or their position on this issue is right. But when it comes to how the issue has been framed previously and what the Democrats are doing right this moment, I do not see them coming out on top. The Republicans, in principle, are okay with the government shutting down. And I mean that not in the sense of the political, but the principle, the underlying idea that less government involvement in people's lives is a good thing, tends to be something that you see on the right, lowering regulation, lowering the amount of interference that the average American citizen gets from the government. Ronald Reagan's quote of, "You should be scared," or the summation of his quote, which is, "You should be scared if someone says, 'Hey, I'm here to help, I'm from the government.'" It's an ethic that still underlies the core demographic of the Republican Party. And that will not change simply because the Democrats push hard enough, and that will enable them and harden them to say, actually, the shutdown isn't as bad as you think. Look at what's still functioning. Oh, wait, everybody's life is still functioning. Now, should the government buckle on SNAP? We said we would get to it, and this is the next political battle. The idea that the Army wasn't getting paid, guess what? They found emergency funding for it. That was out of the way. Republicans tried to get rid of that issue. They'll probably try to do something, maybe redistribute some FEMA money to localities. I don't know what they would do specifically. But it is the obligation of the government to do so. From a stance of honor, duty, and I would say an ethical position is that, yes, the government has promised this program will exist, that certain benefits will be given out, and people are dependent on it. From a principled stand, no, of course not. This is not a place for the government to step in. We are not in wartime. We are not in a place where we need to secure logistical supply chains to even get food to the populace. We, as a government, should not be, I repeat, should not be enabling behavior that is going to be detrimental to the country long term and to the people who are on these programs long term. Short-term assistance, I understand. Means-tested short-term assistance, I understand even more, if I'm to give a little bit of wiggle room here. But it doesn't matter what the principled stand is, because people will look at the arguments being made and they will scream and shout and let it all out that the government has promised them something and that the government is failing them. And though there is a party in power, there is also a party who is pretty darn close and would be needed to dance in this two-person tango. So if there's any room for this to end without one side, if there's any room for it to end the most likely is that two actually tango and they decide on something. I think that's the most likely thing if it's not the Democrats caving. But maybe I'm wrong. I would love to be wrong. I would love for the government to actually get its stuff together. And I don't mean to actually fund the government, to get its stuff together to cut a lot of these programs while the government shut down, and to cut a lot of the workforce while the government shut down, and then come back to a cleaned budget, or at least one that has a lot more flexibility, because a lot of fixed expenses in salary and employment costs were gone down. But hey, maybe that's just my principal stance. I don't believe in a government that is overarching, that is too large. I want our government to be efficient. And I know that sounds really nice and vague, but that's the end goal. There are lots of different ways to get there, and I'm willing to explore those different ways, though I normally believe that's going to require less people. But hey, maybe I'm wrong. So, with all that said, if you want to read today's article, be linked in the description below that like and subscribe button. Also down there, you can find the podcast on Spotify, Pocket Cast, Podvine, as well as the Twitter handle at your DailyFlip. And with all that said, there's only one more thing to say. Stay safe. Don't die.